No, it's not running. It is fun. I miss her when I'm gone. That was
Good evening. This is funny. Nobody took the front row. Surprise. Have you already started the video, or how? I guess we're okay. Well, we can start whenever. I guess we're going to be doing a little videotaping too. So.
Oh yeah, that.
No, that one's good. All right. No, I can get that. So we are going to get started here in just a couple minutes. I believe there still may be a few people wandering in, but we'll just kind of move them in. Nobody really wants to move the front row. It's like students. All right. So we're going to, obviously we got a big topic here. We're doing vaccines. Okay? And most people, if you were to ask them, they would tell you that vaccines are pretty much a controversial type of a topic. Okay? We're going to get the controversy part. We're going to kind of set that aside. This is more about information. That's what we're doing here tonight, is try to share some information that most of you have probably never heard. So is it the other side of the story? Yeah. 99% of it's the other side, because you never hear this part. All you ever hear is the medical end, that vaccines basically cured all diseases and it saved humanity from all kinds of problems. And usually when they talk about that, they'll talk about polio. Okay, that's the big one. So I'm going to start this a little bit different, and I knew here comes somebody. No. Come on in. Perfect. I didn't really start. You're going to sit in the front, aren't you? Yeah, just kidding. So, and again, we still may have more. So I will introduce myself. I do know a lot of you. I recognize faces. Some of you may not know me. I'm Dr. Brian Becker. I've been doing this vaccine program. Actually, I was looking back, and I believe I started teaching this program somewhere around like maybe 2002. So, and I've been trying to get one of my associates to take this program over, because I told her, I said, it's a lot of work. There's a lot of information, and it's always changing. When I do this program twice a year here in the office. I used to teach down at the university as well. I taught down there for, actually I think I did 3 years that I'd go in on one day and teach to 4 different classes, and I did that every semester for, I think it was about 3 years I did that. And what I found is that it's always changing. The information is always changing. The statistics are always changing. There's new vaccines always coming out on the market. There's always something different. So to stay on top of this really becomes a full-time side job. It's like, okay, we're going to do it. All right, I got a month to really start collecting all the updated information, re-update the PowerPoint, change the dates, change the statistics. A lot of the core information is the same. So some people that have been here before, and there might be some wandering in that have been to the program more than once, because there is information that changes, but the core is still pretty consistent, okay? So tonight I'm actually going to do something different. I'm going to start with a video, which I've never done before, but this one, if you pay any attention to the vaccine industry and you pay any attention to the potential adverse reactions and events that occur, you'll find out that there's a lot of stuff out there in the news. And recently, some of you may have heard that there was a big settlement in an autism case. Anybody hear about that? Okay, got a hand back there. There was. We have something, and we'll get into these specifics a little bit more. We have something called the Vaccine Injury Protection Act. And it's a court system. It's basically, it's known as the vaccine court. And recently we had a major case. It was an autism case. Or I'll rephrase that, because what the court found was that the girl ended up with autism-like symptoms. They wouldn't call it autism. And that's only a small part of what we're going to talk about tonight. But I want you to look at this video and pay attention to what the opposing attorney said, because this is a news interview with an attorney that's involved in this case, or at least kind of was involved in following it. She was not the lead attorney, but she followed this case, so she had some very good points. It's about 4 minutes, and then we'll talk about it, and then we'll get into the real, kind of the main part of this program. If you can't hear it, let me know. We'll turn volume up.
A federal court has awarded $1.5 million to the family of a little girl who developed autism-like symptoms after receiving 5 vaccinations in one day. Hannah Poling was less than 2 years old when she got the shots, which were meant to protect her against 9 diseases. Now, her parents say immediately after she developed a fever, seizures, and severe health problems. Her parents filed a claim with what's known as the Federal Vaccine Court.
I wanted to know why my daughter, who had been completely normal until getting 9 vaccines in one day, was suddenly no longer there.
Well, the suit was filed in 2002. 6 years later, the government conceded the vaccines aggravated a cell disorder no one knew Hannah had and left her with permanent brain damage and autistic-like symptoms. This summer, the court agreed on the amount that would be paid to the family. That amount was announced today. Karen DeSoto is a defense attorney and former prosecutor. So, Karen, the natural question is, you have parents who, despite research and science, who believe that their child's autism is linked to vaccines. Does this open the door for litigation for them?
Oh my God. Well, Tamara, there's already 4,800 cases in the vaccine court, in federal vaccine court. The test cases so far up until this case, the cases that were tried were lost. So it really looked like there was going to be no medical evidence to link autism with the vaccines. However, this puts a huge chink in the armor of the government. But Tamara, I think one of the most disturbing things about this case is that the government did in fact settle, but now the case has been sealed. So I think that that's a very disturbing factor that everybody in America really wants to know, hey, if this is a public safety concern and this was because there was a cell disorder or the amount of shots, then shouldn't you tell us who have children who are getting our kids vaccinated?
Did the judge explain, or what would be the thinking behind sealing this, as you point out?
Who's the wonderful computer whiz, right? Caitlin? Our video just froze. That's okay. If we can unlock it, we can kind of tell you some of the end here. We just got to make sure we go to the next slide. As I said, this was the first time we tried to put the video in. So, all right. If you can't get it, if you can get me at least the next slide, we'll just start. So here's what was going on. I'll kind of tell you what, in case we don't get this to follow up. Basically, this case was tried in the vaccine court. It was found in favor of the family of Hannah Poling. They didn't get to say what the numbers were, but they talked about the fact that there's about 4,800 more cases sitting in the court system. She was awarded multi-million dollars, or the family was awarded multi-million dollars. But what I wanted you to hear was what this opposing attorney said, and it was brought up by the news person in the beginning. She said this girl had an underlying cell disorder that nobody knew she had. Did you hear that part? So the attorney says that, in fact, when Anna was talking about the government sealed the case. So basically, nobody can find out the details of this. What we do know is she had what they call a mitochondrial disorder, but nobody knew she had it. And what the attorney asked, she said, well, if that's the case, are they going to start screening all children to see what other children may have this mitochondrial disorder? And the answer is no. There's been no change in any procedure to screen kids to potentially rule out those that may be at high risk because they actually have a cell disorder that nobody knows about. Okay? So that's kind of where this thing went, was the fact that you can be able to switch off there. That would not be good. So basically that's where the whole thing kind of went to, is the fact that we're not going to ever realize or get all the information about why this case settled and why they found that what she had experienced with these vaccines resulted in a neurological brain injury that caused autism-like symptoms.
Shut it down.
So, all right, she's going to shut down. We'll get it rebooted. I've done this so many times, I can probably go along without the PowerPoint, but it's sure nice for you guys. So hopefully you can get that up, and it's updated when you open it back up.
Yep.
The April one. So we're going to talk about vaccines. We're going to talk about things in detail. One of the first slides on here talks about infant mortality. Have you ever heard about that? Like that they actually, every country has an infant mortality rate. Okay? You be Steve. One of the things that one of the first slides talks about is basically that the United States has the second worst newborn infant mortality rating. When you look at some of the ratings, there's a couple different scales depending on what year you look at. This country has been rated as bad as 33rd out of developed countries for infant mortality. The question becomes why? You know, we are the richest country in the world. We have the best emergency medical care system in the world. Why do we have such a high level of infant mortality? Some of the experts would say it's basically because of what we do to our infants. We'll talk about when vaccines start. We'll talk about the adverse reactions. The very first one. How's it coming?
Good.
Anywhere close?
Nope.
So let's do it this way. So the Hannah polling case came out in People magazine. Okay, that was the case we were just looking at. This was a national case about a kid that ended up with autism-like symptoms. This is where it showed up, People magazine. And it didn't show up on the front page. It showed up on page 121. One family's victory. How many of you even heard about this case?
Just from
research,
vaccines,
researching, you came
upon that.
Okay, you stumbled, right? You stumbled across it. This was a national case that the family won a significant, I'm talking millions of dollars of a settlement, and nobody really heard about it. Now, there was also just another case recently, and the girl's name was also Hannah. Her last name was Bruschwitz. And they filed a claim in the vaccine court system. Anybody hear about this one? No? I'm surprised that you didn't hear about this one because this one didn't win. And they went out of the vaccine court system and they went into the actual civil system, or I guess civil would be the word. They filed a lawsuit against the manufacturer of the vaccine because they found evidence to show that the manufacturer knew that there was problems with the vaccine, but never did anything to change it. It went to the Supreme Court. So this was February of 2011, and this was off of CBS News. Supreme Court rejects vaccine lawsuit. So here they had a kid that was vaccine damaged. They had all the information to show that there were other cases associated with the same vaccine, the same lot. And it went all the way to Supreme Court, and they said no. Now, when we get our PowerPoint up and running, we'll talk about the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program, which our government developed in 1986. Our Congress passed a law called the Vaccine Compensation Program, or Act. And in 1988, that then became the Vaccine Injury Protection System. That became the vaccine court. But what they did in that system is they basically gave manufacturers carte blanche, you will not be sued. Because the manufacturers of the vaccine said, look, we need protection. If the government does not protect us from lawsuits, we're not going to produce vaccines. So they got protection. And the Supreme Court, even though that's not what the act was supposed to be, when you look back and you look at the history of that vaccine protection program, that was not supposed to be the case. It was supposed, if there was proven information that the vaccine manufacturer knew there was a problem and didn't correct it, they were liable. But the Supreme Court didn't uphold. That was the agreement way back in 1986, and they didn't uphold that. Which basically what this means now is if you don't win in the vaccine court system, if you had to go there, which they say about 2 out of 3 are denied, you have no other way to go. There's not once the Supreme Court rules on it, there's nothing going to change it. So they're pretty much shut that down. A year or two, well, I guess about 2 years after the Hannah polling won, they filed and they actually won it. So what the difference was, nobody knows other than the fact that there's a lot of pressure to keep these things out of the system. At least we got a computer. We don't have that yet.
coming.
Oh, it's coming. All right. It's gonna make my life so much easier. All right. Just skip over that. Skip over the video part.
Yeah.
We don't want to get locked up again. All right. This one came out of USA Today, and I'm sure none of you have ever seen this. But on the left-hand side, you have what they call the 1983 autism rate was 1 out of every 10,000 children. This was the amount of vaccines that they received in 1983 on the left-hand side for you. In 2008, the autism rate was rated as 1 out of every 150 kids in this country. This was the number of vaccines that they were receiving in 2008. So for those of you that were born, let's say, kind of like the early 80s, if you were born in the early 80s, you have a lot more vaccines in you than those of us that weren't. Because this is a program that they continually add vaccines. The latest thing I just saw is there's actually 95 different vaccines in the process of being developed right now. They're looking at vaccines that we can eat, as opposed to just things that are injectable. 95 different, oh, you got it, thank you. I still owe you lunch for the other thing. I owe lunch again. All right, so now we're going to at least get to hit some of these things that are a little bit, we can see them on here. So let's talk about our purpose. I'm going to have to backtrack a little bit, but these things are important. Our goal here is to strive to provide updated information. We talked about that a little bit already. A lot of this stuff, when you see these slides, I will put this source on there. You will see things out of our Centers for Disease Control, the CDC, our government agency. You'll see things out of New England Medical Journal. You'll also see some of my opinions, okay? My opinions are that. They are mine. They're based on the things that I've learned, okay? Please realize that everybody has an opinion, and there are definitely two sides to this whole thing. Yeah?
Back to you said how many more vaccines they're getting now.
Yep.
Why do they keep adding vaccines if all the major diseases have been wiped out? What's their basis for adding them?
Could be, well,
I have like a million questions.
yeah, that's good. I will preface that by saying if we get done here in 2 hours, I'm doing really well because there's a ton of stuff. So, but I will do my best to kind of do that. If there's some, you can certainly throw some questions out as we hit them. But other ones, I'll catch with you too at the end. But ultimately, and you'll see it on one of these slides coming up, billions of dollars. Billions of dollars, because, and a lot of times these are for diseases that are not life-threatening diseases, and that's the problem, is we're giving kids vaccines for things that, like you said, are eradicated, and we'll talk about why they're not around, because the big myth is that vaccines got rid of them, but you're going to see the statistics that show that these things were already declining well before vaccines ever came onto the market. So yeah, we will hit on those things very specifically. Some of what you'll see will be coming out of the popular press, just like People Magazine, Eau Claire Reader, Telegram. We got a few in there. And as I said, some of my opinions. I always get asked this question, so I will take care of it right up front. I have an 8-year-old, never been vaccinated so far. I always say it so far because people always ask, well, are you going to ever give him any? I say, maybe. If something really strikes me that he really needs something that he does, he's a healthy kid. We just went through the flu in our house. He was out of school for a whole week. And somebody said to me, so why didn't you get him the flu vaccine? Honestly, he was sick. I mean, he was down and out. And I'm like, you know what? I still think that was better for him than the potential risk of a flu vaccine that may or may not work. That's the thing. May or may not work. So you potentially give them risk, and we'll talk about the flu vaccine. You potentially give them a risk in that vaccine, and you don't know if it's even going to be effective. Okay? Yeah, he was sick. He was not happy. He had a fever, all those things. He stayed home. He slept. He's back to school. He's doing well. So it's like, I will take that over the potential risk and the possibility of ineffectiveness on top of that. So this program is designed to empower parents to make good, educated decisions. I don't get to choose for you. Your pediatrician shouldn't choose for you. Your parents or grandparents shouldn't decide what you do for your children. It is all up to you. You get to figure it out on your own. That's what makes parenting so much fun and challenging, okay? This is all about information. It's not an anti-vaccine. I always get asked that. Why are you doing an anti-vaccine program? I said, you will not hear me up here one time tell you not to vaccinate your child. And if you decide not to, great. Make sure you know all you can know to do that. If you decide maybe you're going to do some but not others, okay. But make sure you know which ones you may think are more important and which ones aren't. Some parents come to this and they say, you know what? I'm not doing any vaccines right now. And then I hear a couple years later, like, you know what? I decided I maybe thought I would do this one. Okay. As long as you do the education and learn about it, that's what's important. Now you see why I don't get done unless it's valid. Vaccination is very emotional, controversial. It can be. Years ago, and I actually pulled this article out, in 2005 I was invited down to the public library to do this presentation. And it turns out it was a controversial issue. I didn't realize it was a controversial issue. I knew vaccine was, but I didn't know there was a problem with me going into the library. It got so exciting that the Leader Telegram actually did an article about it and came and interviewed me and interviewed a pediatrician in town. And apparently the director of the public library was getting all kinds of heat because they thought the public library was siding with, anti-vaccine. And it turns out, luckily, there was not the director of the library, but one of the actual coordinators of the library. Good evening. Hey, someone. One of the coordinators of the library refused to cancel the program. Pretty much kind of stood on the fact of freedom of speech is what it was. And I was invited down there. I didn't go out and say, hey, I want to do this program. I was doing it here. It was just great. And somebody that had come here had suggested I go there. And it was actually from that program at the library. It ended up in the university. So it turned out that we got to talk to a lot of people. But it created a lot of stir and a lot of controversy. It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. You can talk about vaccines without arguing and fighting. You can go to your pediatrician and say, you know what? Explain to me, why should I vaccinate my child for chickenpox? Or why should my newborn baby have hepatitis B? You can ask those questions. You should be able to ask those questions of a pediatrician without throwing up flags all over the place that you're, an anti-vaccine and you don't want to do anything. It should be a communication and a conversation. While vaccines are often portrayed as indispensable, they bear in comparison to our innate biological defenses. The reason that these things disappeared, and we have a list of some of the key things, more has to do with the changes in our environment and the wellness of our individual people. From prenatal care to healthy people, all those things played a factor into why these diseases disappeared. Death rates dropped off well before the vaccines ever came into it. So here's the one I mentioned about our mortality rate. So CNN.com, this was from 2006, so some of it's newer, some of it's older. This has not changed much. If you search infant mortality in the United States, and there was just an article in USA Today, that it actually got a little better. By like 0.02% or something, we still have, so we didn't change much, but it's gotten a little bit better. But this one basically said the USA has the second worst newborn death rate in the modern world. The United States has the second worst newborn mortality rate in the developed world, according to a new report. American babies are 3 times more likely to die in their first months as children born in Japan. Okay? That little tag about children born in Japan, that becomes an important issue. We'll get to that slide. But Japan does something different than what we do in this country. Real simply, they don't vaccinate at the young age we do. They hold off their vaccines a little bit longer. Here's one of the infant mortality ratings of some of the countries. This was from 2004. This one rated us at 29th. I saw a more recent one that had us at 33rd. My assistant pulled this one because it was a nice chart. But basically, you can see all the other countries that are way ahead of us in better, less infant mortality ratings. Infant deaths per 1,000 live births is at the bottom. So we kind of rank up here just kind of under under Puerto Rico, which is part of us anyway, under Chile and Slovakia. So countries like Cuba actually have a better infant mortality rating than we do. How come? Why? What's the difference? Again, a lot of the experts would say some of the things we're doing to our young children is part of the problem. So who gets to decide the guidelines? This is a key thing. Who decides what vaccines are going to be out there? What do you think? This can be interactive. The answers are all right there, right? The members of the FDA, members of the CDC, the doctors. Do you know that the last president of the CDC now sits as the head of Merck Pharmaceutical? She went from being president of our Central Disease for Control, who was involved in setting these standards, to now she's president of Merck Vaccine. Or Merck Pharmaceutical, I should say, because they do all kinds of drugs. The CDC grants conflicts of interest waivers to every member on the advisory committee. That means they're involved at some other level besides just deciding on vaccines. Either they have stock in some of the companies or they sit on the boards of some of the companies. They're involved. They literally have to get a conflict of interest waiver signed. This actually came from Chairman Dan Burton, who was on the government reform. So Dan Burton was a senator, and he may still be too. So here's kind of the answer to your question back there, why they keep kind of developing them. Right now, if you look at the numbers, you'll probably find that basically the vaccine industry is about an $18 billion industry. They expect that to go up by 2012. So really within a year, they expect that number to be up to about $21.5 billion in vaccine sales. Now that includes, that's the world. That includes the whole world. So we're sending these things out to a lot of different countries too. Future testing of vaccines. I'll point you to just a couple key things. Vaccines are called, the testing is considered to be too expensive. This came out of the Journal of Infectious Disease. Now this was an article in 1996, but since it costs too much to test vaccines, use the public as test subjects. The example that I'd like to use on this one is HPV, human papillomavirus. We all know it as a cervical cancer one. The commercial, just one, right? We're going to save one more life by getting this HPV. That whole thing was railroaded through so fast. There was really very little testing. Minimal testing done, and they said, okay, and I've read different articles that basically said they were going to monitor this as it was being used to see what kind of adverse reactions will come about. And I've got some good information on that one coming up too. If you look at the very bottom paragraph, vaccines are dangerous and their side effects are grossly underreported. To allow them onto the market without proper testing is asking for problems. This author only hopes that none of the drug companies that make vaccines try to talk the FDA into relaxing their standards on proving the safety of products such as this before they go on the market. You remember a drug called Vioxx? Vioxx was an arthritis drug. Pulled off the market because people were dying. What's the other one? Avandia, a diabetic one, pulled off the market, I believe, as well. These drugs get through, drugs, vaccines. We'll talk about a specific vaccine that was pulled off the market, and the predecessor then had, or the one that came after that had problems as well. So believe me, if you are relying on the FDA to make sure that these things are safe, you're definitely playing Russian roulette, because we've seen it in other drugs, not just vaccines, that there's problems. Ask the experts. These are some of the things that we all thought were safe years ago. Some of this started many years ago. DDT, a chemical pesticide. Asbestos. I know a guy that his job is removing asbestos. They wear suits. They wear ventilation systems. We had no idea it was a problem. Cigarette smoking was safe, right? How many people, women, men, they all smoked. They started young because nobody knew anything bad about it. Experts said the polio vaccine isn't contaminated with a monkey virus. Did you ever hear of simian SV40 monkey virus in polio vaccine? They used to say that this thing was bad and it caused cancer. Now there is proof. They have many studies now that show that this polio vaccine from all those years ago has created a problem for people now because it literally has a simian virus in there that was causing cancer. So we know that that's the case. Thalidomide, some of you are way too young to know about that one, but that was a drug they gave to women when they were pregnant for morning sickness. Babies started being born without arms and legs and had little stumps for arms. They thought, oh yeah, it's a perfectly safe drug. DES was another one that caused problems, and that was one they were giving women in pregnancy, but they were finding that the babies then were actually developing cancer. It wasn't affecting the mother, it was affecting the fetus, and then when the babies became older, they were finding cancer in those. And they linked that back to DES. So if I jump down to the very, actually I'll jump down to the second one. Expert says the swine flu is coming. So did we have our major swine flu outbreak that we were supposed to have? Did millions of people die around the world or in this country? No, it didn't happen. We got a couple slides we'll talk about there. But I believe this one here, and I wrote it as experts say vaccination is safe because a lot of the experts still say that. There's a lot of experts, of course, on the other side that say it's not. And I believe this will hit that list where they'll realize that at some point in time, they'll realize that a lot of vaccines that our kids are getting or have gotten are going to be considered not safe. Here's some questions. If you decide to vaccinate yourself or your child, there are some key things that you should ask before you do that. Okay? And again, remember, this is not an anti-vaccine. As a matter of fact, in your pamphlet, there should be a user-friendly vaccine schedule that was written by a medical doctor. But if you choose to do that, ask these questions. Is my child sick now? Never, never vaccinate a kid that's sick. Cold, flu, fever, any kind of thing, do not vaccinate. You're setting them up for potential risk. Has my child had a bad reaction to a vaccine before? Not only your child, but a sibling or a parent. If a parent, this is where it gets into family history. If a parent has had a vaccine reaction issue, that child is potentially more susceptible as well. Do I know if my child's at high risk of reacting? That's the catcher. Do we know? How could we know? We showed the video of Hannah Poling, an underlying cell problem nobody knew about. So you always have to realize that there's going to be that potential issue of risk as well. Do I know how to identify a vaccine reaction? What is it? Screaming, crying, high fever, restlessness, unable to eat, vomiting, pain at the injection site. I mean, that's kind of the standard, but if that pain doesn't go away, or swelling at the injection site, those are all indicators of a reaction. How do I report a vaccine reaction? There's a system called VAERS, VAERS, Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System. We'll talk about that a little bit too. Do I know the manufacturer's name and lot number? If you choose to vaccinate, get all that information. Know exactly which vaccine you're doing, know what lot number it's coming out of, because if there's a reaction, number one, you want to report it so that other parents potentially are not going to get that. But two, if for some reason you have severe type of a reaction, you know exactly what it was and what it came from. Which creates one of the problems because they're now putting so many of them together. I know there's a few pregnant women in here. This, one of my patients brought me from Luther Middleford. Have you heard about the new vaccine called Pentacell? Anybody hear about that one yet? Okay, here's what Pentacell is, a new combined vaccination, which we all know they combine them, right? They have MMR, which is 3 different ones in one, DPT, 3 different ones. Pentacell now has diphtheria, tetanus, acellular pertussis, Haemophilus influenza type B, and polio all in one shot. All combined together. And I searched this thing out, and the one thing I was able to find out is they actually, because of the way they combined it, I think it was the aluminum, they actually had a higher level of aluminum in that one than if you did them all the old style way, if you separate them out. So an aluminum is used to basically stimulate the system, so your body creates a reaction to it. We'll talk about some of the adverse issues with aluminum as well. So according to May 2010 USA Today study, nearly 40% of parents are delaying or restraining from vaccinating their toddlers. This number is definitely going up, 22% in 2003. I get a lot of questions in my practice here. Should I vaccinate? When should I vaccinate? What? And some of them don't even know I do this class. They ask questions. They're like, I heard maybe I shouldn't do this, or I should start, There's a lot of people out there that are thinking real hard of whether they want to do this or whether they want to do as early. And there's a lot of the proponents out there that are, again, kind of the, and I don't want to say anti-vaccine, but are really out there talking about vaccines. Some of the big things they're talking about is not vaccinating as early and not vaccinating as much. You guys know who Jenny McCarthy is, the actress. Okay, she's big out there. Her son ended up with autism. She is real big. She was on Larry King. She's been on a lot of different talk shows through the last few years. She talks about the fact that too many, too soon. And that's probably one of the biggest things, is too many, too soon. Some of this came out in USA Today. Parents continue to question the safety and effectiveness of our vaccine program. 1999, but here we've got roughly 1/4 of American parents have serious concerns over safety of vaccines their children receive. That was in 2000. Wall Street Journal in 2003, growing opposition to the number of shots required. When it came to that H1N1, I believe it was 40% of the parents had very serious concerns about vaccinating their child for H1N1. Okay? Many medical doctors, when it comes to the flu vaccine, the numbers range from 30 to 40% of medical doctors and healthcare providers will not get that vaccine. Okay, so it's not just parents, it's also people in the medical community. Robert Mendelsohn, I have to always use him because he is probably one of the real early proponents about this. This is a great book for any of you that do not have it yet, How to Raise a Healthy Child in Spite of Your Doctor. He is was an MD, he passed away several years ago. This is one of his quotes right here. There's no convincing scientific evidence that mass inoculations can be credited with eliminating any childhood disease. I urge you to reject all inoculations for your child. This was a medical doctor, okay? B.J. Palmer is a chiropractor, but I have to put this in because of where we're at. The idea of poisoning healthy people with a vaccine virus is irrational. Think about it. We take a healthy individual, a healthy newborn baby, and we inject them with a disease, whether it's a killed virus or a live virus or a weakened, what they call an attenuated virus, and we inject them with it, and we expect the result is that that's going to make them better and stronger and healthier. It's not really logical, okay? And which is why we'll come back to the fact that you look at that and you say, okay, well wait a minute, that's what everybody does. But when you look at some of the studies, there's studies out there that show that basically 15 to 20% of our children have some level of brain neurological developmental problems. 15 to 20%. What has changed? Yep.
I just was thinking, if you say I get the influenza, the flu, and I build immunity to it by getting it, isn't that kind of what they're doing by injecting it earlier? Is that correct in my thinking, or that it would be building their immunity towards it?
Well,
if they were to get it, they would just have.
That's the idea. Is to build if now in influenza, if it's the right strains.
Right.
Okay, and we'll talk about the fact that they only put 3 strains into a vaccine, and they develop an influenza shot basically in the spring of the year previous.
Right.
So basically, like actually more like January, February.
Is that just for the flu then, or is it for all vaccines?
It's just for the flu because that's a strain that's constantly changing. Now some of the others do too, but they don't change. They don't change the strains of like MMR and things.
Right.
They don't change those vaccines. Like the flu vaccine is changed and updated every year.
So they have no idea if it really works.
Right. It's an educated guess based on what's on the other side of the world.
But for like the polio and...
Right. For polio vaccine has not changed. Other than the fact we've gone from oral polio, which was alive, now we're back to the injectable, which is an inactivated polio. But again, when you see some of the statistics on polio, why we're still vaccinating for polio really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So we'll hit a couple more here. Medical groups oppose vaccine mandates. Association of American Physicians and Surgeons calls for an end to mandatory childhood vaccines. Our children face the possibility of death or serious long-term adverse effects from mandated vaccines that aren't necessary or that have very limited benefits. These are the medical people. This was actually the executive director of this organization, MD, down there too. The immune system, let's talk about it briefly because it's what keeps us healthy. It's what fights disease. It's what allows us to get a disease and get healthy afterwards, okay? So here's how the immune system works, real simple. You have your passive immunity system. So for an infant, breastfeeding, transplacental, meaning basically mom sends out all the good stuff through the breast milk. Okay, so if you're nursing and you're healthy and you've got all these antibodies from fighting off these diseases naturally, you're going to send that on to your baby. Transplacental, baby's inside there, you're going to be sending that same thing. Here's the problem. Women that are getting vaccinated are not going to transplacentally send the same immune antibodies through the system. So all the women that have been fully vaccinated now have children. Their children are not going to get the same as somebody that's coming from a mother that never had the vaccines, got things naturally. Okay, so there's a difference there. Obviously, natural to build our immune system naturally, basically being exposed to viruses and bacteria. My son having the flu built his immune system. Was he miserable? Yes. He was not happy. He didn't feel good. But I feel good in the fact that he built his immune system. He now has antibodies to that particular strain of influenza that's going to help him down the line. And he built up his immune system. He strengthened his immune system by being challenged. Here's the problem with vaccinated or artificial immunity. It doesn't last. They know that. It doesn't last. We're going to talk about mumps outbreaks. We'll talk about chickenpox outbreaks. We'll talk about shingle. We'll talk about all the things that people still get. Pertussis outbreaks. And these are people that have been vaccinated. And they still have these outbreaks because it doesn't last forever. It's artificial. Artificial will not last as long as natural exposure. If you naturally got chickenpox, more than likely you will never get it again. Some cases occasionally, it's rare, but sometimes you'll get it. If you get it through vaccine, there's no guarantee that you're not going to get it again, because that vaccine will wear off over time. So some questions we got to talk about. Are vaccines the reason for the decline in incidence and deaths in childhood diseases? As we said earlier, many experts believe the answer is no. Did vaccines reduce the death rate from childhood illnesses? You're going to see some charts that will show that these childhood diseases and other diseases that we're not being vaccinated for were declining before the vaccines ever came into the picture. Nearly 90% of the total decline in mortality, scarlet fever, diphtheria, whooping cough, and measles between 1860 and 1965 occurred before the introduction of antibiotics and widespread immunization. This was out of a book called The Epidemics of Modern Medicine. 90% were already on a decline. Here's some of the key reasons. Improved natural immunity, but improved sanitation. Did our sanitation system in the country get better from the 1930s to the 50s to the 60s to the 70s to the 80s? Yes. You know, does anybody still have an outhouse? Maybe. But most of us have sewer and plumbing and running water that's clean running water. Okay? Improved quality of water. Overall, yes, our water is much better than what it ever was. Improved hygiene. We don't just take a bath once a week and then share that water with everybody else. Most people nowadays, if they don't take a shower every day, it's pretty close to that for most people. Better nutrition. Overall, yes, we at least have the options of better nutrition. Does everybody choose that? No. Okay? One of the biggest things that you can do for a baby to help them to manage any kind of illness, whether it's a childhood disease or fever or flu or anything else, is good nutrition. Okay? What gets me more than anything is when I see kids that literally live on sugar. Because sugar is probably one of the worst things that we can do to our body, because it messes up our immune system. It throws everything out of balance. Okay? And it's amazing how many kids that are drinking pop or soda all the time, loaded with sugar. Kids that get candy all the time. Kids that get bribed with candy all the time. And then the parents wonder, geez, my kid's sick again. He was sick a week ago, now he's sick again. How come? What? Nutrition. You want a kid to get through a childhood disease or any other illness, make sure they have good nutrition, okay? Refrigeration of foods. Obviously that was something that was a problem back many years ago. We don't have issues with spoiling, rotting, bad food that could potentially cause, because food can harbor some of these things. That's why we have that's why that's important. Better medical care. We got it. We have antibiotics. We have emergency care. So it is a big part. The fact that we have those things allows people to be better and to recover quicker from some of these things. Here's a little chart on polio, when the vaccine came and what the death rate was. It's pretty simple. If you look down at the left-hand side, 1950, you see the real peak of the death rate in regards to polio. And it was nasty at the time. There's no doubt it was nasty. Unfortunately, the polio vaccine created some problems when it first came out, because it was a live vaccine, and it actually spiked the polio epidemic in the first year it came out. So, but if you look at when the vaccine came, you'll basically see that it was already a significant decline in the mortality rate. Okay, so it was already going down before they ever introduced the vaccine into the system. So, if you look at polio specific in this country, I mean, we have been in the United States basically polio-free since 1993. Okay, and I believe we were certified in 1994. We were certified. I'm sorry. She didn't get that one changed. We've been polio-free since 1991 and certified polio-free in 1994. Polio has been pretty much eliminated in North America, Europe, South America, and Australia. And again, realize that this had a lot more to do with things that were changing in our environment in this country. Yeah?
In the previous slide that had the chart, why was there that small increase in around the 1950s?
Right in the 60s there? I don't know if, honestly, I don't know the answer. I don't know if they had changed because they were going back and forth between the oral polio vaccine and the inactivated polio. So I don't know if that little increase was when they were going back to the live vaccine. Yeah, and it's possible because there was a little bit of a spike there. There was no, and when we look back at the numbers, I'm going to go back to that next slide because it talks about even cases coming in. But my thought is the fact that that was probably a change in the vaccine because like I said, they went back and forth, and then they realized that the oral polio one, because it was a live vaccine, that they were seeing increased cases. I just don't remember what the time frame was.
Is that the world or just the United States?
No, this was the United States. I believe this one was just the United States, this particular chart. And we've got another one coming up that shows a little bit more detail. That was a simple one. So people often worry about immigrants bringing polio into the United States. Despite all the planes that come in, we haven't had any import of polio into this country since 1993. There's really been nothing that has changed. So, no naturally occurring cases since 1979 in the United States. So there is no polio around here. So the question is, why do we still vaccinate against polio?
Money.
Money is one, but people would say because we don't want it to come back.
Right.
They'll say it was so bad we don't want it to come back. But if a lot of these experts are right that polio was already going away when we were changing sanitation, hygiene, all those things, then it's not coming back. You know, whether we stop vaccinating or not, yeah.
If it did, and I wasn't, or my kid wasn't vaccinated, can they get the vaccine and it would help prevent it then?
After the fact?
Well, if
all of a
it,
sudden.
yeah.
Well, if the polio vaccine is effective based on if there is a new strain of polio, yes, it could help.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, based on everything, there hasn't been a case since 1979 of naturally occurring in this country. So really, chance of that coming back extremely slim. Yeah.
I'm not very familiar with polio, but if you get it, is there any cure for it?
Well, yes, because really, when you look at polio, there were only certain cases where there was really the severe polio, what they call the paralytic, where they ended up in the iron lung. Most of the cases resolved on their own. So we'll look, I think I got one of those slides in here that shows some of those statistics of how few those cases were. I actually have the numbers. If I don't have the slide, I got the numbers on a sheet too. Western Hemisphere, basically polio-free since 1994. So we pretty much have, it's been a done deal for a long time. Here's one of the other charts, a little bit more specific on some of the mortality ratings that we have. You can see everything's color-coded. If you look at where the vaccines were coming in, if you go way to the left side, 1900s, you'll see those were where the numbers were at the highest. As the vaccines were coming in, or before the vaccines were coming in, they were all already on a downward decline. Diphtheria vaccine was introduced right here. We had a little spike shortly after that was. In this country, let's see, I believe diphtheria, we have not, they did a test or a study between 2000 and 2007. There were 3 cases of diphtheria in the United States in that time. 3 cases in a 7-year period of diphtheria. And diphtheria is treated with antibiotics. So back here, in those early years, we didn't have the antibiotics to treat this. It was already on a decline before that without even having the antibiotics. So 3 cases in that 7-year period. Whooping cough vaccine, which is your pertussis vaccine, you can see that basically death rate was already down very low at that point. Measles vaccine, again, a lot of these things, the death rate, the mortality rates of these diseases had already significantly dropped off before the vaccines ever showed up. Scarlet fever, which we didn't even have a vaccine for, followed the same path, basically that red line, where it was decreasing and dropping down as well. So here's what we're at right now. Basically, for most kids, they will get 49 doses of 14 different vaccines before they hit the age of 6. That is kind of, I printed out the thing from the CDC as well. But that's basically what most kids are looking at. Some of those are for what they classify as high-risk kids as well. But basically that goes right through 4 or 6 years, all the different vaccines are putting in. Influenza, every single year now. That's one that the flu vaccine was kind of incrementally brought in. Started out with just the seniors, then we moved it down to the adults, and then we included the 5 years to 18-year group, and then we went down to 6 months, and we added basically everybody in. What the goal is for flu is every single person from 6 months on gets a flu vaccine every single year. All the others are mixed in there as well, so it is quite a dosage that we get. This came from the National Vaccine Information Center, which is a great website. I believe it's on your information as well. And that is not again not an anti-vaccine, but it is an information site. Yeah.
They lump them together. Is that for the
convenience?
Yes, and is it? Do they find? Have there been any studies that show that? Like I've heard, maybe getting the vaccines individually could be better?
Could reduce the risk, yeah. Hard to do that. Very hard to get them individually. You really have to...
But if I choose to...
You could try.
Yeah.
But if you were to choose that...
It's hard to do.
That would be, right, it is hard. That would be a less invasive, because like I said, a lot of the concern is too many, too soon. You know, so if you were to choose, you could look at trying to separate some of those out.
Right.
But you will have a hard time trying to do that. But it is definitely could reduce some of the potential problems. So there is a vaccination exemption. Are you aware of that? That you do not have to vaccinate your children if you choose. How many of you knew that? Yeah, good. Some people may not have. And most people, when I first started doing this, a lot of people, I'd ask that question, I'd say, so do you have to vaccinate your child? And everybody's like, yeah. Everybody thought you did. Now people, I think, are becoming more aware and realizing that they do have an option. And really, if there's anything that I think is probably the most important thing to come out of this, is that we have to at least have a choice. We have to maintain, and I got an article here, State of Washington and New Jersey, they're trying to eliminate the choice. In the state of Washington, they're trying to make it that the medical doctors have to approve an exemption if a parent chooses an exemption. That it has to be approved by the medical doctor, which is basically saying that, okay, everybody and anybody's going to get vaccinated. So in the state of Wisconsin, we have an exemption. You can exempt for health reasons, personal reasons, or religious reasons. Yeah.
Is there a child or person that is not vaccinated? Do they carry a risk of getting somebody that has a lower immune system, like a nursing home patient or a small child with a low immunity or a sickness? Do they carry that potential? Could they be a carrier of something if they didn't?
Well, of course, any of us could.
Right.
I mean,
but are they more likely to be a carrier, or is that more?
It's probably not more likely, because they actually will say, like, when a kid gets vaccinated, they are potentially risk to be around other people. Yeah. So, now, like, yes, if you've got a kid that has measles, do you want to take them into a nursing home where there's people with low immunity? Of course not. So yeah, I mean, they
like forever, or just, Well,
no. Once they have a particular disease and they go through the process, no, they're no more of a carrier in a sense than anybody else.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, no, not a problem there. So as I said, health, religion, or personal conviction is the choice that you have. I believe you might have a copy of the form in there, but basically there is an immunization waiver. If you don't have it, there's an organization in the state of Wisconsin called Citizens for Free Choice in Immunization, and they have a newsletter that goes out as well. So that's a good one. But anytime from a school standpoint, anytime they tell you your child has to be vaccinated, they have to provide you with a waiver as well. So it's always typically on the back side of this sheet that says what vaccines has your child had. If you look at the back side, usually down at the bottom it'll say, I choose not to vaccinate because, you just have to look for it. But there is a waiver. I do have a copy of something else that has been going around on the internet, and it's basically a form for a pediatrician to fill out that wants to vaccinate your child. And it's a 3-page form, and he basically signs off that he knows what all is in this vaccine. He knows the lot number. He knows what adverse reactions. And that one's been going around the internet because parents are basically taking that to their pediatrician and say, okay, you want to vaccinate him for MMR? Here, you sign this saying that you accept responsibility, that you know that there may or may not be a potential risk. Of course, I don't know of any pediatrician that would probably sign it. But it is going around. I do have a copy of that as well. So, first vaccine given. Anybody know the answer?
Hepatitis B.
Hepatitis B, all right. Good, we gotta roll, boy. You guys wanna be here till 10? Just kidding. Smile on the face. All right, hepatitis B. I'm gonna actually read a little bit to you. Merck Manual. Anybody heard of Merck Manual? This is a little medical Bible, right? Is that right over there? Medical Bible, there you go. Merck Manual, let's read a little bit about hepatitis. Hepatitis B, so actually I'm gonna, oh boy, this is gonna be a trick. All right, hepatitis B is less easily transmitted than hepatitis A. One way it can be transmitted is through contaminated blood or blood products. I want you to listen to how people that are kind of high risk for this. Let's see, transmission, okay. Transmission commonly occurs among injecting drug users who share needles, as well as between sexual partners, both heterosexual and male homosexual. A pregnant woman infected with hepatitis B can transmit the virus to her baby during birth. The risk of exposure to hepatitis B virus is increased for patients undergoing kidney dialysis or in cancer units, and for hospital personnel who have contact with blood. Also at risk are people in closed environments such as prisons and institutions where close personal contact exists.